Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Alabama. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know in which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1838 in the dense pine forests of southern Alabama, where the Blackwater estate stood as a monument to both prosperity and unspoken horror. The plantation, nestled between the winding banks of the Alabama River and the small settlement of Cedar Hill, was known throughout Montgomery County for its exceptional cotton yield and the peculiar silence that seemed to envelop its 600 acres. Even passing travelers noted how the usual sounds of plantation life, voices, work songs, the clatter of tools, seemed somehow muted at Blackwater, as if the very air refused to carry sound across its boundaries. The estate belonged to Jeremiah Blackwater, a third-generation plantation owner who had inherited the land from his father in 1829. Standing at 6 feet tall with a commanding presence and cold, calculating eyes, Jeremiah was known for his methodical approach to business and his distant demeanor. Unlike neighboring plantations that changed hands frequently during economic downturns, Blackwater remained steadfastly in family control, its prosperity undiminished despite the financial panics that periodically swept through the South. Local records indicate that while other planters struggled, Jeremiah somehow managed to increase his holdings, purchasing adjacent lands from desperate sellers at fractions of their value. What made Blackwater truly unusual, however, was not its economic resilience, but the curious phenomenon documented in county records and mentioned in the diaries of several Cedar Hill residents. In the decade between 1829 and 1839, not a single enslaved person attempted to escape from Blackwater. In an era when plantation owners throughout Alabama reported frequent escape attempts, often requiring the services of professional slave catchers, Jeremiah Blackwater never once posted a notice for a runaway, never once requested the services of the infamous Cedar Hill Patrol. The mansion itself was a testament to the wealth accumulated by the Blackwater family over generations. 2 stories of white-columned grandeur, with extensive wings extending to either side, creating a U-shaped structure that seemed to embrace visitors in a cold welcome. The central hallway, lined with imported marble and adorned with paintings of stern-faced Blackwater ancestors, led to a grand staircase that swept upward to the family's private quarters. Behind the main house lay the working buildings of the plantation, the overseer's residence, the cotton gin, storage barns, stables, and beyond them, hidden from the view of visitors, the cramped quarters of the enslaved workers. This peculiarity of no escape attempts attracted the attention of Isaiah Montgomery, a traveling journalist from Boston who visited Alabama in the spring of 1839 to document conditions in the Deep South. His unfinished manuscript, discovered in 1963 in the archives of Tuskegee University, contains this observation: there exists at Blackwater a system of control so thorough, so complete in its psychological domination, that physical chains seem almost redundant. The overseer, a man named Ellis Holt, has devised methods that render the enslaved people immobile, not through iron, but through terror of one another. Montgomery's notes reveal that he intended to investigate further, but his journal entries end abruptly in April 1839. Records from the Cedar Hill courthouse indicate that Montgomery departed Alabama suddenly, citing urgent family matters in Boston. He never returned to complete his investigation, and his manuscript remained unpublished. Later research by historians would reveal that Montgomery had received an anonymous letter warning him that his inquiries at Blackwater had been noted, and that accidents befall those who pry too deeply into private affairs in this county. The letter, preserved among Montgomery's papers at Harvard University, was written on the same distinctive stationery used by Jeremiah Blackwater in his business correspondence. The first concrete documentation of the unusual methods employed at Blackwater came from Dr. Thomas Wiley, the county physician who occasionally visited the plantation to treat Jeremiah Blackwater's recurring gout. A thin, scholarly man with spectacles and a carefully trimmed beard, Dr. Wiley had trained in Philadelphia before returning to his native Alabama. In his medical ledger, preserved in the Alabama Historical Society's collection, Dr. Wiley made several notations beyond standard medical observations. On February 12, 1838, he wrote, "Attended J. Blackwater for gout inflammation. While administering treatment, observed unusual behavioral patterns among the house servants. They watch one another with uncommon vigilance, rarely speaking, even when addressed directly by their master. The atmosphere suggests not merely the expected deference, but rather an active surveillance among them." 3 months later, another entry reads, "J. Blackwater's condition improved. During examination, Overseer E. Holt entered to make report. Upon his arrival, all servants present became markedly rigid in posture. One young woman near the doorway visibly trembled. Holt acknowledged this with what appeared to be satisfaction. There exists between him and the enslaved a dynamic I have observed nowhere else in my 20 years of practice in this county." Dr. Wiley's observations continued throughout the spring and summer of 1838, documenting subtle but significant details about the social dynamics at Blackwater. The normal hierarchies observed on other plantations based on skill, relation to the master, or position seem supplanted here by a different system entirely. Status appears fluid, changing day to day, with individuals who seem favored one week being notably diminished the next. This volatility creates a persistent anxiety that is palpable even to a visitor such as myself. Ellis Holt, the architect of this unusual system, presented an unremarkable appearance that belied his methodical cruelty. Of medium height and build, with thinning brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard, Holt had come to Blackwater in 1831 after serving as an assistant overseer on a plantation in South Carolina. His references had described him as extraordinarily effective in maintaining discipline, though they provided few details about his methods. Jeremiah Blackwater, facing production challenges and concerned about the possibility of unrest following Nat Turner's rebellion that same year, had hired Holt with the explicit mandate to ensure absolute control and maximum productivity. What Dr. Wiley had begun to glimpse was merely the surface of a system of psychological control that would eventually be exposed through a collection of personal papers discovered during the renovation of the Blackwater Mansion in 1954. The papers belonged to Ellis Holt, Blackwater's overseer, and contained detailed accounts of his methodologies, which he referred to as the structure, a comprehensive approach to plantation management based on fostered distrust, strategic reward, and psychological isolation. The papers were discovered behind a false panel in what had once been Holt's office, suggesting he had deliberately concealed them. The collection included daily journals spanning his entire tenure at Blackwater, correspondence with Jeremiah Blackwater and other plantation owners interested in his methods, and most disturbingly, a manuscript titled Principles of Human Management, in which Holt outlined his philosophy and techniques in clinical detail. According to Holt's journals, the foundational principle of the structure was the complete elimination of solidarity among the enslaved population. "The greatest threat to proper management," he wrote on July 18, 1834, "is not individual defiance, but collective resistance. When they view one another as allies, they become ungovernable. When they view one another as threats, they govern themselves." In a letter to Jeremiah Blackwater dated August 3, 1834, Holt elaborated, "I have observed that traditional methods of control rely primarily on fear of the overseer or master. This creates a simple dynamic. The enslaved fear us, but trust each other. My innovation reverses this equation entirely. Under my system, they may fear us less than they fear one another. This is the true key to perfect dominion." Blackwater's response, preserved alongside Holt's letter, was brief but telling. Your quarterly production figures speak for themselves. Continue with your methods and expand them as you see fit. Additional resources will be provided as needed. Holt's system involved several interlocking components. First was the creation of an elaborate hierarchy among the enslaved people, with positions and privileges that could be gained or lost based on their willingness to report the infractions of others. The most minor deviations from established rules, speaking after dark, keeping small personal items, or exchanging words in their native languages, were to be reported to Holt immediately. The journals reveal that Holt never punished someone based solely on these reports. Instead, he would conduct what he called assemblies of truth, where the accused and their accuser would be brought together with several witnesses. The accused must always know who has spoken against them, Holt wrote. The uncertainty of invisible judgment undermines the system. The certainty of facing one's accuser strengthens it. What made these confrontations particularly insidious was Holt's next innovation. The punishment for an infraction was never administered by him or other white overseers, but by the accuser themselves. If an enslaved person reported another for keeping a small memento or speaking after curfew, they would be required to administer the punishment, typically deprivation of food, extended work hours, or in more serious cases, physical punishment. The beauty of this approach, Holt wrote with disturbing pride, is that it renders both parties equally despised. The accused resents the accuser for obvious reasons. The remaining population resents the accuser for their betrayal, yet simultaneously fears being accused themselves. No bonds of solidarity can form in such an environment. To further complicate these social dynamics, Holt introduced what he called redemption pathways. Those who had been accused and punished could improve their standing by becoming accusers themselves. This created a perpetual cycle of betrayal and retribution, with individuals constantly shifting between roles of accused and accuser, victim, and enforcer. The system was reinforced through Holt's meticulous record-keeping. He maintained what he called the Ledger, a bound book in which he recorded every accusation, punishment, and the names of those involved. The ledger was displayed prominently in the central yard, where everyone could see it but few could read it, creating an atmosphere of omniscient surveillance and uncertainty. In his manuscript, Holt explained the psychological impact of the ledger. The power of the written record extends beyond mere documentation. For those who cannot read, the ledger becomes a mysterious oracle, containing unknown judgments and predictions. I have observed individuals staring at its pages with undisguised dread, imagining perhaps that their most private thoughts are somehow recorded therein. Plantation records show that by 1838, the 147 enslaved individuals at Blackwater had been effectively divided into constantly shifting factions, each vigilant against the others, each seeking advantages through Holt's system of rewards and punishments. What began as a management technique evolved into a self-sustaining ecosystem of fear, where even the most intimate relationships became potential vectors of betrayal. Perhaps the most disturbing element of Holt's system was described in a letter he wrote to a fellow overseer at a neighboring plantation in March 1838. The true triumph is achieved when they come to believe surveillance is unnecessary because transgression is impossible. When each individual becomes convinced that even their thoughts are somehow known to the others, the need for actual observation becomes largely ceremonial. In the same letter, Holt described his use of architectural and environmental factors to enhance the structure's effectiveness. The arrangement of living quarters maximizes exposure. No conversation can occur without being potentially overheard, no action without being potentially observed. The windows are positioned to prevent privacy, the sleeping pallets arranged to eliminate secluded corners. Even the lighting is designed to eliminate shadows, where secrets might be exchanged. The psychological impact of living under such conditions was documented by Reverend James Thornwell, a Presbyterian minister who visited Blackwater in late 1838 as part of a regional church outreach. In his private correspondence, discovered in the archives of the Charleston Historical Society in 1961, Thornwell wrote to his wife, "I have today witnessed something so contrary to the natural order of human relations that I find myself unable to properly articulate its essence. The people here move as if constantly observed, speak as if always overheard, and regard one another not with the Christian compassion or even the base solidarity of shared suffering, but with a wary calculation more suited to adversaries than fellow creatures under the same yoke." Thornwell was a complex figure, typical of his time and place, a Southern theologian who defended slavery as a biblical institution while advocating for humane treatment of enslaved people. His letter continues, "One perceives here not merely the expected atmosphere of subjugation, but something more insidious, a corruption of the natural human inclination toward mutual support in adversity. Where I have elsewhere observed enslaved communities creating bonds of fellowship, despite their circumstances, here I see only atomized individuals, each isolated from all others despite their physical proximity." Thornwell attempted to hold a Sunday service for the enslaved population, a practice that was common, if not always sincere, throughout plantations in the South. His letter continues, "During the sermon, I spoke of brotherhood in Christ and mutual support through tribulation. The response was unlike anything I have encountered on other plantations. No amends, no responsive movement, not even the usual polite pretense of attention. Instead, each person sat rigidly, eyes forward or downcast, as if afraid that any reaction might be noted and reported. When I invited them to join in prayer, several glanced quickly at the overseer, who stood at the back before lowering their heads. It was prayer without communion, worship without congregation." What Thornwell was observing was the culmination of Holt's system, a community so thoroughly fractured that even the shared experience of religious worship could not momentarily unite them. Court records from Montgomery County reveal that Reverend Thornwell made a formal complaint to local authorities about conditions at Blackwater, but the matter was dismissed without investigation after Jeremiah Blackwater made a substantial donation to the county courthouse renovation fund. In his subsequent sermons in Cedar Hill, Thornwell made oblique references to unchristian practices on certain plantations, but never again directly challenged the Blackwater system. His diary, however, contains repeated references to troubled dreams in which he saw souls standing together yet infinitely separated, like islands in a still sea, visible to one another but unreachable. The true extent of Holt's system might have remained hidden if not for an unexpected death that disrupted the careful balance he had created. On September 3, 1838, according to the Cedar Hill Town Registry, a man named Solomon, identified in Blackwater's property ledgers as the plantation's most senior field worker, died unexpectedly. The official cause listed was heart failure, though Dr. Wiley's private notes suggest he was suspicious of the diagnosis, writing, "Called to Blackwater regarding the death of an enslaved man, body already prepared for burial upon my arrival. Symptoms as described inconsistent with simple heart failure. Requested examination denied by E. Holt, who claimed urgent hygiene concerns necessitated immediate interment." Solomon had been at Blackwater longer than any other enslaved person, having been purchased by Jeremiah's father in 1802. At approximately 65 years of age, he occupied a unique position in the plantation hierarchy, respected for his knowledge of the land and agricultural practices, yet fully integrated into Holt's system of control. According to plantation records, Solomon had been among the most frequent accusers in the early years of the structure, but had gradually assumed a more complex role as an occasional mediator. Solomon's death created what Holt described in his journal as a dangerous vacuum in the structure. As the oldest person on the plantation, Solomon had occupied a complex position in Holt's system, frequently reporting infractions, but also occasionally intervening to reduce punishments, thereby maintaining a precarious balance between fear and complete despair. His sudden absence destabilized the social hierarchy Holt had so carefully constructed. In the weeks following Solomon's death, Holt's journals show increasing concern about maintaining control. On September 29, 1838, he wrote, "The whispers have begun. Not the usual reports and accusations, but something more troubling, questions about S. and the manner of his passing. Two primary suspects identified as potential sources, Daniel from the carpentry shed and Mary from the kitchen house. Immediate intervention required." Daniel, according to plantation records, was a skilled carpenter in his early 30s who had been at Blackwater since 1825. Mary, approximately the same age, had worked in the kitchen house for most of her life at Blackwater. Neither had been particularly prominent in Holt's system, neither frequent accusers nor frequently accused, which perhaps allowed them to maintain a degree of independence that others had lost. The intervention Holt described was implemented the following day, when he gathered the entire plantation population in the central yard for what he termed a necessary demonstration. According to his account, he announced that he had received reports of dangerous talk regarding Solomon's death, and that such speculation undermined the order of the plantation. What followed, as described in Holt's cold, methodical prose, was a calculated escalation of his system of control. He called forward Daniel and Mary, the two he suspected of questioning the official account of Solomon's death. Before the assembled crowd, he presented evidence of their conspiracy, fragments of conversation reported by others, moments when they had been seen speaking privately. Then came the innovation that would cement Holt's reputation in the historical record of psychological torture. Rather than punishing the accused himself, he announced a new procedure. They would be judged by a council of their peers, consisting of 5 individuals selected from among those who had most frequently reported infractions in the previous month. This council would determine not only their guilt, but also the appropriate consequences. The archived testimony of Marcus Johnson, a former Blackwater resident, interviewed by the Federal Writers Project in 1937 at the age of 93, provides the only first-hand account of this event from the perspective of the enslaved community. "I wasn't more than 20 when they put Daniel and Mary in the middle of everybody. Mr. Holt, he picked out 5 people who everybody knew was always telling on others to save themselves. They sat up like judges while Mr. Holt read out all these things Daniel and Mary supposed to have said about old Solomon being killed instead of dying natural." Johnson's testimony, recorded on scratchy aluminum discs now preserved in the Library of Congress, continues with palpable tension even 7 decades later. They made the council vote right there, in front of everybody, on whether Daniel and Mary was guilty. And you know they all voted yes, because what else they going to do with Mr. Holt standing right there? Then the terrible part come. Mr. Holt say, "Now you decide what happens to them." And they had to choose. They had to say out loud what should be done. And everybody watching, everybody seeing who say what. According to both Johnson's testimony and Holt's journals, the council ultimately decided that Daniel and Mary would be separated and reassigned to the most difficult tasks on the plantation. Daniel to the drainage ditches in the swampy eastern section, Mary to the remote northern field where the rocky soil made cotton cultivation particularly arduous. Additionally, they would be forbidden from speaking to anyone except their immediate supervisors for 30 days. The public nature of this judgment and the forced complicity of the 5 council members in determining the punishment of their peers represented the perfect distillation of Holt's philosophy. No one remained innocent. Everyone participated in the system of control. And solidarity became impossible when survival required participation in another's suffering. Holt's journal entry from that evening reveals his satisfaction with this innovation. Today's procedure succeeded beyond expectation. The council members showed appropriate severity. Excessive leniency would have compromised their own standing. The gathered assembly witnessed not merely punishment, but collective enforcement of the structure. Most valuable was the visible discomfort of the council members themselves, forced to assume responsibility for decisions previously left to me. This discomfort ensures their future cooperation, as they are now invested in the system's maintenance. The events surrounding Daniel and Mary might have remained merely another cruel episode in Blackwater's history, but their case ultimately triggered the partial collapse of Holt's carefully constructed system. According to plantation records, on October 31, 1838, precisely 1 month after their punishment began, both Daniel and Mary disappeared from Blackwater. Their escape represented the first breach in the plantation's perfect record of retention, and Holt's journal entries in the following days reveal a man obsessed with understanding how his system had failed. Impossible that they could have planned this during their separation. Equally impossible that either could have navigated the swamps alone, particularly M, who has never been beyond the northern boundary. Assistance must have been provided. The structure has been compromised. In a letter to Jeremiah Blackwater dated November 2, 1838, Holt attempted to downplay the significance of the escape, while simultaneously requesting additional resources for security. The recent departure of 2 individuals, while regrettable, does not indicate a systemic failure, merely an opportunity for refinement. I recommend increasing the number of white overseers from 3 to 5 and the acquisition of additional tracking dogs. These measures, combined with certain adjustments to the structure, will ensure no repetition of this anomaly. Blackwater's terse response, scrawled across the bottom of Holt's letter, reveals his displeasure. 2 escapes after 7 years of none is a failure, not an anomaly. Implement whatever measures necessary, but understand that continued production depends on perfect control. Additional resources approved conditionally, results expected immediately. Jeremiah Blackwater immediately engaged the services of Elijah Barrett, the most notorious slave catcher in Montgomery County, providing him with detailed descriptions of the fugitives and offering an unusually large reward for their capture. Barrett, a tall, weathered man with a reputation for both effectiveness and brutality, had been tracking runaways throughout Alabama and Mississippi for nearly 2 decades. Barrett's written report, filed with the county sheriff on November 17, 1838, indicates that he tracked the pair as far as the Escambia River before losing their trail. He noted with professional admiration, "These are not typical runaways moving in panic and confusion. Their path suggests planning and outside assistance, possibly from the Maroon communities rumored to exist in the river bottomlands." Barrett's report continued with a detailed analysis of the fugitives' movements. They traveled only at night, avoided roads entirely, and employed various methods to confuse tracking dogs, including crossing water repeatedly and using pepper and tobacco to disrupt scent trails. Such techniques are not instinctive but learned, suggesting prior communication with experienced escapees. This level of preparation is uncommon and indicates a significant breach in plantation security. The escape of Daniel and Mary created what Holt described as contagion of possibility among the remaining population at Blackwater. His journal entries throughout November and December 1838 document increasing difficulties in maintaining the structure, fewer reports of infractions, instances of deliberate collective slowdowns in work, and most alarmingly to Holt, brief moments of eye contact and subtle gestures that suggested communication outside his system of surveillance. On November 25, 1838, Holt intercepted a crude map apparently showing routes through the eastern swamps. Unable to determine creator, handwriting disguised and paper common to entire plantation, instituted immediate searches of all quarters, resulting in discovery of several prohibited items: 3 small journals with encrypted entries, a collection of pebbles arranged in patterns suggesting counting or calendar, and, most concerning, a carved wooden whistle that produces nearly inaudible sound, possibly used for signaling. The discovery of these items triggered a plantation-wide crackdown. Holt extended working hours, reduced rations, and implemented random night inspections. According to Dr. Wiley's medical ledger, this period saw a sharp increase in cases of exhaustion, malnourishment, and stress-related ailments. His entry from December 3, 1838, notes, called to Blackwater to treat multiple cases of collapse in the fields. Observed conditions significantly deteriorated since previous visit. Recommendation for increased rations and reduced labor hours rejected by E. Holt, who cited security concerns as taking precedence over health considerations. On December 7, 1838, Holt implemented a dramatic escalation in response to these challenges. His journal records assembled all hands at first light, announced the expansion of the council system, now 10 permanent councils of 5 members each, with rotating leadership, every transgression, no matter how minor, to be judged publicly, all punishments to be collective rather than individual, the accused, the accuser, and 3 randomly selected others, all receive the same consequence, differentiated only by degree. When all suffer for the actions of each, vigilance becomes universal. This innovation represented the culmination of Holt's methodologies, a system in which every person was simultaneously victim, enforcer, informer, and judge. The collective punishment model ensured that even those who tried to remain neutral would suffer, creating an environment where the only perceived path to safety was active participation in the control of others. In a particularly calculated move, Holt selected for his councils individuals who had shown signs of resistance or independence, effectively forcing them to become the most visible enforcers of the system they had begun to question. His journal entry from December 8th reveals the psychological sophistication of this approach. Council appointments strategically made. Those who have shown reluctance to participate in the structure now find themselves its primary administrators. The internal conflict this creates between self-preservation and solidarity with their peers will render them particularly effective in their new roles, as they must constantly demonstrate their commitment to the system to avoid suspicion of harboring the very resistance they once represented. The winter of 1838-1839 was unusually harsh in southern Alabama, with record-low temperatures recorded in Montgomery County. The combination of weather conditions and Holt's intensified system created what Dr. Wiley described in his medical ledger as a miasma of desperation at Blackwater. His entries from January 1839 document an increase in stress-related illnesses, called to treat unusual clusters of ailments, sleeplessness, nervous prostration, digestive complaints without apparent physical cause. Most concerning are 3 cases of sudden muteness in previously vocal individuals. Dr. Wiley's growing concern about conditions at Blackwater is evident in his increasingly detailed documentation. His entry from January 18, 1839, includes this observation. The medical literature describes conditions of prolonged psychological distress resulting in physical manifestations. What I observe at Blackwater corresponds to such descriptions, but with an intensity and uniformity I have not encountered in my practice or studies. It appears that an experiment in human psychology is being conducted with results that would be of interest to medical researchers were they not so disturbing from a humanitarian perspective. Despite Dr. Wiley's concerns, Jeremiah Blackwater continued to support Holt's methods primarily due to their economic effectiveness. A letter from Blackwater to his factors in Mobile, dated January 25, 1839, boasts, "Despite regional declines in productivity and ongoing financial uncertainties in the broader economy, Blackwater continues to maintain exceptional output levels. Our management innovations have ensured consistency, even in these challenging times." It was during this period of intensified control and physical hardship that the most mysterious event in Blackwater's history occurred. On the night of February 3, 1839, according to courthouse records, a fire broke out in the cotton storage barn, rapidly spreading to adjacent buildings. Jeremiah Blackwater, who had been entertaining guests from Montgomery, led efforts to contain the blaze, but strong winds complicated the task. The fire was first noticed shortly after midnight by a house servant who alerted the Blackwater family and their guests. The plantation bell was rung, summoning all hands to battle the blaze, which had already engulfed the main storage barn and was spreading to nearby structures. According to Jeremiah Blackwater's account, given in a deposition to the county sheriff, the response was immediate and orderly, with the enslaved workers forming bucket chains from the nearest well and pond. The official report, filed by Sheriff William Danforth on February 5th, attributed the fire to natural causes, likely lightning from the storm system that passed through the county on the night in question. However, personal correspondence between Sheriff Danforth and Judge Howell Carter, discovered during the renovation of the Cedar Hill Courthouse in 1952, suggests a different conclusion. The weather on the night in question was cold but clear, with no lightning observed anywhere in the county. County records indicate that while the main house was spared, much of the eastern portion of the plantation, including Holt's quarters and office, was destroyed. Additionally, multiple ignition points were identified by my deputies. These facts, combined with the curious circumstance that no lives were lost despite the fire's rapid spread, lead me to conclude that the event was orchestrated with remarkable precision. Most significantly, Holt's quarters were among the first structures to burn, and with them, all current copies of his infamous ledger. The only documentation of the structure that survived was the journal he apparently kept in a separate location, which was discovered during the 1954 renovation. In the aftermath of the fire, according to plantation accounting records, Jeremiah Blackwater faced significant financial strain for the first time. The loss of stored cotton, combined with damage to processing equipment, created debts that forced him to sell several parcels of land. More notably, Ellis Holt departed Blackwater on February 20, 1839, ostensibly to seek medical treatment in New Orleans for burns sustained during the fire. A letter from Jeremiah Blackwater to his brother in Virginia, dated February 25, 1839, provides additional context for Holt's departure. The fire has caused not merely financial damage, but a more concerning disruption to our management system. H believes his position here has been compromised beyond repair. The careful balance he maintained has shifted, and despite his willingness to rebuild, we have jointly determined that new oversight is required. He departs for N.O. With my gratitude and recommendation, though, I confess private relief at the change. His methods, while effective, created an atmosphere that even I found increasingly disquieting. No record exists of Holt's arrival in New Orleans, and his subsequent fate remained unknown until 1967, when a researcher at the University of Alabama discovered a death certificate issued in Mobile on March 9, 1839. The document identified the deceased as Ellis Holt, male, approximately 45 years of age, with cause of death listed as throat laceration. The attending physician noted, "Injury appears self-inflicted, though unusual angle of incision raises questions that cannot be resolved due to advanced decomposition. Deceased discovered in rented room after landlord reported unusual odor." Further investigation revealed that Holt had checked into the Harborview Inn in Mobile on February 22, 1839, paying in advance for 2 weeks' lodging. He had kept to himself, according to the innkeeper's statement to local authorities, taking meals in his room and leaving only for brief periods. The innkeeper reported that Holt seemed nervous, frequently checking the window and startling at ordinary noises, but otherwise gave no indication of suicidal intentions. Whether Holt's death was suicide or murder remains one of the enduring mysteries of the Blackwater case. The timing of his death, so soon after leaving the plantation, and the ambiguous nature of his fatal injury have led historians and researchers to speculate about possible connections to the fire and the growing resistance to his system. Equally mysterious is the fate of Daniel and Mary, the escaped pair whose actions had first challenged Holt's system. No record exists of their capture, and their names never appear in the registries of free black communities in the North, leading some historians to speculate that they may have reached the Maroon communities in the Florida borderlands or possibly continued to Mexico. A tantalizing hint about their possible fate emerged in 1972 when a researcher examining census records from an African American settlement in Canada discovered an entry from 1851 listing a couple named Daniel and Mary Johnson, with ages and birthplaces consistent with the Blackwater fugitives. The entry indicated that they had arrived in Canada in 1840, having traveled through the Western Territories and had established themselves as a carpenter and seamstress, respectively. Blackwater Plantation never regained its former productivity after the events of early 1839. Jeremiah Blackwater hired a new overseer, a man named Thomas Littleton, who, according to county records, implemented a more conventional approach to plantation management. An 1840 agricultural census indicates that Blackwater's output had decreased by nearly 40% compared to its peak under Holt's management. Littleton's approach, while still based on the fundamental exploitation and control inherent to the plantation system, lacked the psychological sophistication of Holt's methods. His regular reports to Jeremiah Blackwater, preserved in the plantation records, reveal frequent frustration with what he termed the lingering effects of previous management approaches. On May 12, 1840, he wrote, "Despite consistent application of standard disciplinary measures, productivity remains below expectations. Workers exhibit unusual patterns of cooperation that undermine traditional authority structures. They respond to punishment with a stoicism that renders it largely ineffective as a deterrent. Something fundamental in their understanding of their situation has been altered, and I find myself unable to reverse this change." Perhaps the most telling document regarding the aftermath comes from the diary of Eleanor Blackwater, Jeremiah's wife, discovered in a collection donated to the Alabama Department of Archives and History in 1949. Her entry from April 12, 1840 reads, "J. continues to lament the decline in production and discipline since H.'s departure. What he fails to comprehend is that once such a system falters, it cannot be rebuilt. The people move differently now. They speak differently. Though still in bondage, something has altered in their perception of themselves and one another. J. calls it insolence. I recognize it as the quiet dignity that comes from having glimpsed, however briefly, the possibility of solidarity." Eleanor Blackwater, a complex figure in this narrative, appears to have maintained a certain critical distance from her husband's business practices while never openly challenging them. Her diary reveals a woman educated beyond the norm for Southern ladies of her era, with extensive reading in philosophy, theology, and even early psychological theories. Her observations of plantation life are often more nuanced than those of male commentators, noting subtle changes in social dynamics and individual behaviors that others overlooked. Her entry from June 1840 provides a particularly insightful analysis of the post-Holt transformation. "What fascinates me is not that they resist, this is natural and has always occurred, but the form this resistance now takes. It is neither the explosive rebellion the neighboring planters fear, nor the individual defiance that overseers know how to crush. Instead, it is something more fundamental, a shared understanding that power, while absolute in physical terms, cannot penetrate certain inner territories. They have discovered something that neither J. nor Mr. Littleton comprehends, that solidarity need not be visible to exist." Jeremiah Blackwater died in 1846 of complications from his chronic gout. The plantation passed to his son Charles, who gradually sold off portions of the land to address ongoing financial difficulties. By 1855, according to county tax records, Blackwater had been reduced to less than half its original size. During the Civil War, the remaining property was abandoned when Charles joined the Confederate Army. He did not return, having died at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. The former Blackwater lands were divided and redistributed during Reconstruction, with portions going to formerly enslaved families through the Freedmen's Bureau, though these gains were largely reversed during the subsequent backlash of the late 1870s. The main house, which had survived the 1839 fire, was eventually converted into a county administrative building in the early 1900s, serving various functions until its renovation in 1954, which yielded the discovery of Holt's journals. Local folklore preserved fragmented memories of Blackwater's unusual history. Oral histories collected from residents of Cedar Hill in the early 20th century include numerous references to the silent plantation and the place where they watched each other. These stories, passed down through generations, retain the essence of Holt's system even as the specific details faded from living memory. One particularly persistent story, recorded by WPA folklorists in 1938, described a peculiar phenomenon observed by travelers passing Blackwater at night during the 1830s. Folks who rode past after dark said you'd see lights moving around the slave quarters, but not hear a sound, not talking, not singing, not even footsteps, just silence and them lights moving like ghosts. People said it wasn't natural how quiet that place was, like the air itself was holding its breath. The final known account related to the structure comes from Marcus Johnson's 1937 Federal Writers Project interview. Years after freedom came, folks who'd been at Blackwater would sometimes run into each other in different places. Wasn't much talking about those times, just a certain look that would pass between them. But I remember one thing my mother told me. She said after the fire, after Holt was gone, people started sitting together in the evenings again, not talking much at first, just being near one another. She said it took almost a year before anybody would sing out loud, even when no white folks was around. That's how deep that man's poison went into our minds. But it didn't stay forever. Nothing does. Johnson's testimony provides valuable insight into the lasting psychological effects of Holt's system. His mother, Hannah Johnson, had worked in the spinning house at Blackwater from 1830 until emancipation. According to plantation records, she had been neither particularly prominent in Holt's hierarchy nor specifically targeted, existing in the uncertain middle ground that characterized most of the enslaved population's experience. Johnson's interview continues with a revealing anecdote. My mother told me about the day after they heard Holt was dead. Nobody announced it official-like, but word got around. She said at first nobody reacted. Folks had learned too well how to hide what they felt. But that evening, one of the old women started humming while she worked. Just humming, nothing bold. And nobody stopped her. Nobody reported it. That's when my mother knew something had changed. The gradual reassertion of human connection described by Johnson aligns with observations made by Thomas Littleton in his reports to Jeremiah Blackwater. On April 3, 1839, Littleton wrote, "Detected increasing instances of mutual assistance among field workers, sharing water, adjusting each other's loads, compensating for weakness without direction. Attempted to discourage such behavior through targeted punishment with limited effect. The expected reporting of these infractions by others has not materialized, suggesting a collective shift in behavioral norms." By June 1839, Littleton's reports show increasing frustration. Previous methods of maintaining separation and competition among workers increasingly ineffective. Observed coordinated work patterns emerging spontaneously in cotton fields. Individuals adjusting pace to maintain group cohesion rather than maximizing individual output. When questioned, all deny deliberate coordination, yet the pattern persists. Without Holt's elaborate system of incentives and surveillance, unable to prevent this development. Jeremiah Blackwater's response, scrawled in the margin of this report, was succinct. Production figures are what matter. If coordination improves efficiency, allow it. If not, break it. Simple principles, T. Apply them. But breaking the emerging solidarity proved more difficult than Blackwater anticipated. Dr. Wiley, who continued to visit the plantation to treat various ailments, noted in his medical ledger on September 9, 1839, remarkable improvement in general health conditions at Blackwater despite no significant changes in material circumstances. Fewer stress-related complaints, reduced incidence of digestive disorders, even injuries healing more efficiently. The medical literature suggests that psychological state significantly influences physical health. Perhaps what we observe here is the inverse of the decline noted during H's intensified regime. Eleanor Blackwater's diary provides additional confirmation of this transformation. Her entry from October 1839 observes, "The sounds of the plantation have changed. Where once there was unnatural silence, now one hears occasional laughter, snatches of song, the natural murmur of human connection." Jay perceives this as evidence of declining discipline. I see it as the inevitable reassertion of humanity against artificial constraints. The resilience of human connection in the face of systematic attempts to destroy it forms one of the most significant aspects of the Blackwater story. Holt's journals unwittingly document this resilience even as he worked to overcome it. On November 12, 1837, he wrote with evident frustration, "Discovered evidence of covert communication systems operating outside established channels. Hand gestures during field work, patterns in sweeping the yard, arrangements of tools, all apparently carrying meaning invisible to overseers. Revised work assignments to break observed patterns, but new ones emerge. The persistent creativity in circumventing isolation is both remarkable and troubling." This observation reveals a critical limitation in Holt's system. While he could manipulate formal structures and visible behaviors, the fundamental human capacity for connection proved more resilient than his methodologies could account for. People found ways to communicate, to maintain bonds, to preserve their humanity, even under the most extreme conditions of enforced division and suspicion. The archaeological record provides tangible evidence of this resistance. During excavations conducted at the former Blackwater site in 1982, researchers from Auburn University uncovered a series of small objects buried beneath the floors of what had been the enslaved quarters, carved buttons with consistent patterns, polished stones with distinctive markings, fragments of cloth knotted in particular ways. The lead archaeologist's report concluded, "These items appear to represent components of a covert communication system, allowing for the exchange of messages and maintenance of community bonds outside the official channels of plantation life. Their consistent placement, typically in northeast corners approximately 12 inches below floor level, suggests an organized, systematic approach to preserving connection in an environment designed to prevent it." Further evidence of resistance emerged during the examination of the plantation's physical remains. The architectural layout, which Holt had described as designed to maximize surveillance and minimize privacy, showed signs of subtle modifications made by the inhabitants. Slight adjustments to sleeping pallet positions, strategically placed baskets or tools that created blind spots in sight lines, small openings created between adjacent cabins, all indicated a persistent effort to create spaces beyond the overseer's watchful eye. As historians and archaeologists pieced together these fragments of resistance, a more complete picture of life under Holt's system emerged, one that acknowledged both the severe psychological trauma inflicted and the remarkable resilience demonstrated in response. What had appeared in Holt's journals as a perfect system of control was revealed through these alternative sources as a constant struggle between imposed isolation and the human drive for connection. The fire of February 1839, which marked the beginning of the end for Holt's system, remains the subject of ongoing historical debate. The official explanation of lightning or accidental ignition has been largely discredited, but the exact circumstances of the fire, who set it, how it was coordinated, and whether it was intended specifically to destroy Holt's records and undermine his system, remain uncertain. Marcus Johnson's testimony offers one perspective. "Nobody ever said straight out who started that fire, but my mother told me that everybody knew exactly what to do when that bell rang, where to go, which buildings to save, which ones to let burn. She said it was like they'd all had the same dream about it beforehand. Not planned out loud because that was too dangerous, but understood all the same." This suggestion of collective, unspoken understanding aligns with Eleanor Blackwater's observation that the response to the fire showed a coordination that seemed almost preternatural, as if each person moved according to a script no one had written but everyone had memorized. The precision of the response, ensuring the fire destroyed specific structures while preventing its spread to others, suggests deliberate action rather than panic or coincidence. Sheriff Danforth's suppressed conclusion that the fire showed evidence of remarkable precision supports this interpretation. His letter to Judge Carter noted that despite the extensive property damage, no lives were lost, and the fire spread in a pattern that seemed to target specific structures while sparing others. The timing of the blaze, beginning shortly after midnight when the house servants had retired but before the night watchmen began their final rounds, suggests careful observation of plantation routines, Danforth wrote. The simultaneous ignition at multiple points indicates coordination among several individuals. Yet interrogation of all present has yielded no useful information, an unusual unanimity of ignorance that itself suggests collective purpose. In the aftermath of the fire and Holt's departure, Blackwater Plantation entered a period of transition that would ultimately lead to its decline. Thomas Littleton's conventional approach to plantation management produced adequate but unremarkable results, and Jeremiah Blackwater's health problems increasingly limited his direct involvement in operations. Eleanor Blackwater's diary entry from December 1841 offers a poignant reflection on this decline. Jay still speaks occasionally of the golden age under Holt's management, when Blackwater's productivity exceeded all neighboring plantations. He recalls the profits but seems to have forgotten the atmosphere of those years, the palpable dread that hung over everything, the way even the house servants moved like sleepwalkers, the silences that felt heavy enough to touch. For all his business acumen, he never understood that what he purchased with those profits was a slow poisoning of the human spirit, including, I believe, his own. By the time of Jeremiah Blackwater's death in 1846, the plantation had already lost much of its former prominence. Charles Blackwater, educated in Philadelphia and described in local records as more suited to literary pursuits than agricultural management, showed limited interest in maintaining the family enterprise. His correspondence from this period reveals a young man uncomfortable with the institution of slavery and ambivalent about his inheritance. In a letter to a former classmate dated July 1847, Charles wrote, "I find myself the reluctant proprietor of a declining enterprise built upon principles I cannot in good conscience defend. Yet I am equally unable to envision a practical alternative that would not result in financial ruin for the family and uncertain fate for those currently in our employ. I exist in a moral limbo, taking half measures that satisfy neither conscience nor practical necessity. These half measures included reducing the workload, improving living conditions, and allowing greater autonomy in daily life for the enslaved population. While falling far short of addressing the fundamental immorality of the system, these changes nonetheless represented a significant departure from both Holt's psychological manipulation and Littleton's conventional strictness. Records from this period show increasing instances of enslaved people at Blackwater purchasing their freedom or that of family members. Charles Blackwater's account books indicate that he often accepted below-market payments for these transactions, sometimes extended over several years. By 1855, Blackwater's enslaved population had decreased to 87, down from the 147 recorded during Holt's tenure. The deteriorating economic situation of the plantation, combined with Charles Blackwater's ambivalence about slavery, created conditions that Eleanor Blackwater, in her final diary entry before her death in 1854, described as neither freedom nor its complete absence, but a liminal state in which the outer forms of the old system remain, while its inner certainties have dissolved. She noted that those still bound to Blackwater moved with a dignity that would have been unimaginable in the days of the structure, They negotiate rather than merely obey. They question when questions were once unthinkable. The shadow of Holt's system has not disappeared, but it grows fainter with each passing year. When Charles Blackwater departed to join the Confederate Army in 1861, he left the plantation under the management of Samuel Wilson, the son of a neighboring small farmer. Wilson's correspondence with Charles during the war years documents the plantation's final decline. Cotton production minimal due to seed and labor shortages, he wrote in 1862. Focus shifted to food crops for local consumption. Many former workers have departed for Union lines. Others remain, but on negotiated terms that increasingly resemble wage labor rather than traditional arrangements. Following Charles Blackwater's death at Shiloh and the Union victory, Blackwater Plantation as an institution effectively ceased to exist. During Reconstruction, approximately 300 acres of the former plantation were distributed to freed people through the Freedmen's Bureau, while the remaining lands were sold to pay accumulated debts and taxes. The main house and surrounding acres were purchased in 1868 by James Montgomery, a northern businessman with connections to the Freedmen's Bureau. Montgomery, possibly related to the journalist who had first documented Holt's system in 1839, converted the property into a school for the children of formerly enslaved people. The Montgomery School operated until 1877, when mounting violence from white supremacist groups and the withdrawal of federal protection forced its closure. The property subsequently passed through various hands, serving as a private residence, county offices, and eventually falling into disrepair until its renovation in 1954. It was during this renovation that the hidden compartment containing Holt's journals was discovered, bringing to light the full details of the structure that had been hinted at in earlier accounts. The discovery generated significant academic interest, with historians, psychologists, and sociologists examining Holt's methods as a case study in systematic psychological control. A 1957 article in the Journal of Social Psychology characterized the structure as a sophisticated application of divide-and-rule tactics, leveraging fundamental human social dynamics to create an internally self-regulating system of control. The author noted disturbing parallels to techniques used in totalitarian states and prisoner-of-war camps in the 20th century. In 1968, during preparations for a county highway project that would pass near the former Blackwater lands, construction workers uncovered a collection of small objects buried approximately 3 feet below the surface: a carved wooden button, fragments of a mirror, a smooth river stone with faint markings, a tarnished metal comb. A report filed with the Alabama Department of Transportation suggested that the bundle represented a deliberate act of memorial or reclamation, possibly connected to the unusual social conditions documented at this site during the antebellum period. The items were eventually housed in the state archives, cataloged simply as Artifacts, Blackwater Site, circa 1840-1860. Further archaeological work conducted in the 1980s and 1990s revealed additional evidence of both Holt's system and the resistance to it. Archaeologists from Auburn University determined that the items had been deliberately placed together, wrapped in deteriorated cloth, sometime in the mid-19th century. Excavations of the former overseer's residence uncovered fragments of the ledger that had survived the 1839 fire, confirming details described in Holt's journals. Examination of the enslaved quarters revealed hidden storage spaces beneath floorboards containing personal items, small memento of the very kind forbidden under Holt's rules. Perhaps most significant was the discovery of a concealed room beneath the old smokehouse, accessible only through a narrow passage hidden behind a false wall. The room, approximately 8 feet square, contained evidence of regular use over an extended period: a small bench, deteriorated fabric that may have served as bedding, and, most remarkably, walls covered with scratched markings that archaeologists identified as a combination of African symbols, Christian imagery, and what appeared to be a calendar or counting system. The creation and maintenance of such a space, in direct violation of plantation rules, would have required cooperation, shared risk, and mutual trust among multiple individuals over time, precisely the forms of connection that Holt's system was designed to prevent. The true extent of Ellis Holt's system of psychological control, the full impact of its methods on those subjected to it, and the precise sequence of events that led to its collapse remain partially obscured by time and the deliberate destruction of records. The lead archaeologist's report concluded, "This space represents a remarkable act of collective resistance, a literal and figurative underground where a community could be maintained beyond the reach of surveillance. What survives through journals, medical ledgers, official documents, and the fragmented testimonies of survivors is the outline of a calculated attempt to weaponize human relationships against themselves, to transform community into a mechanism of control." Yet the archaeological evidence, oral histories, and post-emancipation records also reveal the limits of such systems, the persistent human capacity for connection, solidarity, and resistance, even under the most adverse conditions. The story of Blackwater is simultaneously a testament to the depths of calculated cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systematic attempts to break it. The site where Blackwater Plantation once stood is now largely farmland, with little to mark its historical significance. A small plaque erected by the Alabama Historical Commission in 1986 offers a brief sanitized account of the plantation's existence. It makes no mention of Ellis Holt, the structure, or the fire of 1839. In recent decades, historians and community members have advocated for a more complete commemoration that would acknowledge both the horror of Holt's system and the courage of those who endured and ultimately undermined it. A proposal for a more comprehensive historical marker, including excerpts from Marcus Johnson's testimony and archaeological findings, was submitted to the State Historical Commission in 2018, but remains under review. Perhaps these small personal objects, hidden in the earth long after their owners had passed on, represent the final testament to the resistance against Holt's system, tangible proof that even under the most extreme conditions of enforced division and suspicion, the human capacity for connection, memory, and solidarity remains inextinguishable. To this day, descendants of families connected to Blackwater report unusual sensations when passing the former plantation grounds. Not supernatural phenomena, but a weighted silence, a quality of stillness that seems to demand remembrance. As one local resident told an oral historian in 1992, the air feels different there, not haunted like people say, but like the ground itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally tell the whole truth about what happened in that place. And perhaps that is the most enduring legacy of Blackwater and the structure. The recognition that psychological wounds leave no visible scars, that systems of control can operate through human relationships as effectively as through physical force, and that the most profound acts of resistance sometimes leave the faintest traces in the historical record. The full accounting of what transpired at Blackwater may never be completely known, but in the fragments that remain, in journals and ledgers, in official reports and private correspondence, in the memories passed down through generations, in objects buried and later discovered, we glimpse the outline of both extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary resilience. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, we are confronted with unsettling parallels to modern forms of social control and division. The sophisticated psychological manipulation employed by Holt, his understanding of how to turn human connection into a vulnerability rather than a strength, his creation of systems where everyone becomes complicit in maintaining their own oppression, these elements resonate with techniques observed in authoritarian regimes, cults, and coercive institutions throughout modern history. Yet the Blackwater story also offers a profound insight into the limits of such control. Despite the comprehensive nature of Holt's system, Despite its careful design and ruthless implementation, it ultimately failed to permanently destroy the human capacity for solidarity. When circumstances changed, when Holt's influence was removed, when his records burned, when the system of surveillance faltered, people found their way back to connection, slowly rebuilding the bonds that had been deliberately severed. This resilience suggests something essential about human nature, that our inclination toward community, toward mutual support and understanding, is not merely a social convenience, but a fundamental aspect of our being that reasserts itself even after the most systematic attempts to suppress it. In the slow recovery of the Blackwater community after Holt's departure, in their gradual return to singing, to shared meals, to collective resistance against continued oppression, we see the irrepressible human drive toward connection prevailing against calculated attempts to replace it with isolation and fear. And in that glimpse lies a vital reminder that even the most carefully designed structures of control contain within them the seeds of their own undoing, and that the human capacity for solidarity, though it can be suppressed, can never truly be extinguished.